¡Mamá! ¡Papá! ¿Dónde están?
Congratulations for your animated feature. For me, it's one of the best films I have seen this year. I've seen a lot of films. So, my first question is, how do you deal with these issues, showing all these deep thoughts and feelings without almost any words?
Well, I mean, Kirk and I have always been fans of, I guess, what we would call cinematic storytelling. So very much the opposite of just close-ups of people talking at each other, finding a way to tell the story visually. It kind of goes back really to the world of silent cinema, almost from the 1920s and before, except obviously, well, they had music, somebody playing live, and we have sound effects as well. But beyond that, because it's a story about characters that can't talk, that don't share the same language, and also humans and animals who can't use a verbal language to express things with each other, it just seemed like an obvious way to go to try and tell the story with as little dialogue as possible. And before we became involved, Frank Cottrell Boyce had written the screenplay based upon Michael Morpurgo's book. And Frank had already taken the decision to take as much dialogue out of it as possible, because in the book, Kensuke can speak some English, and he felt it would be better if they couldn't share the same language. And essentially, when Kirk and I came on the project, we took that idea with it because we love silent cinema, and we ran with it even further and used all the toys in the toy box of cinema to be able to tell this story: color, camera blocking, visual performance, facial expressions, music, sound effects, to tell it with absolutely the minimum number of words we could, which we feel makes the film both more universal around the world, but it also means the audience has to work just that little bit harder to watch what's going on and begin to appreciate what's going on, and they get more involved that way, we feel, than somebody just telling them what they're feeling on screen.
Yes, and of course, the film works wonderfully. I want to know also, how do you deal with this timing in the animation, in the storytelling, because it's not an usual film of these days. It's slower, it's deeper, so, and of course has a beautiful message at the end. But I want to know, how do you feel dealing against the fashion of this dopaminic stimulation that we have in all these animation films?
We were well, partly because of the content. The book lends itself to be this kind of story. It's a slightly strange mixture of action adventure film with a very gentle personal story at the heart of it, but also being an independent film, a European co-production, we didn't have the pressure to compete with Hollywood animation and the type of thing you would have with that, which would be lots of wisecracking characters, very, very fast, very, very in your face, talking and singing animals. Didn't have to address any of that thing. Neil said about the cinematic storytelling and this kind of silent filmmaking that we like. Characters talking 90 to the dozen is not kind of what we're really into. So we were very lucky to, be making an independent film where no one telling us what to do. Our producers were just supporting us to tell the story that we wanted to tell. So we didn't feel the need to compete. There's no point competing with a movie that has $200 million budget. So we just make the kind of film that we'd like to make that best serves this story the way that we thought it should be told. We also need to give credit to our editor, Richard Overall, who, when we were making the animatic, he was our editor. So he was coming back to us with the scenes, and they were coming back a lot slower than I had anticipated. If I was editing it myself, I would have done it a lot faster. I wouldn't have been brave enough to allow the scenes to breathe as much as they do. And we saw them, and we thought, oh my God, this is terrific. When you just let a scene breathe with the two characters in the room with each other, saying almost nothing, but using music cleverly and trying to push the plot points forward all the time, and working out how to do that within a scene that's not saying a lot, this kind of, magical thing starts to happen. So we have to give credit to Richard, and then we certainly encouraged that once he started doing that.
You mentioned a beautiful expression, the scene need to breathe, and the movie also for me is breathing because it's an alive. How do you develop these characters from the design to the concrete drawing and final drawing? For instance, the Japanese character for me, Kensuke, It's a very, very important character, especially that speak to nowadays, because we can see a lot of war around us, a lot of crisis around us, and this character has this peaceful and complete control of his life, despite he's in an island completely alone.
When it comes to Kensuke himself, I'd say that, I mean, well, there's two things here. Design-wise, visually, we go through a process of sketching, doing lots of sketches of various types of old Japanese man and thinking, okay, how old would he be if this had been the Second World War and when the film's set? And we had a Japanese consultant who we would always turn to because we wanted to be careful that we were, not offending anyone culturally, or that we were getting things accurate in terms of how he would behave, how he would stand, how he would cut his hair, even stuff like that. So we had this amazing consultant. They gave us hundreds of photos and stuff to guide us. But then once we had the imagery and had decided to remove most of the dialogue, I mean, in the case of Kensuke, when Ken Watanabe came in, he has a very, very deep connection to this story. I mean, he absolutely was not an actor that was just walking in to do a couple of hours work and going out to his next job. He'd really thought about this. He knew the book well already before reading the screenplay. Even though he didn't actually have much dialogue to say in terms of words, even when he was making effort noises, grunting or panting or straining in some way, every single one of those noises, he wanted to know emotionally what was going on, and he would discuss with us and talk through what this meant. So he was putting himself in an emotional position, even just to make those noises. And then once we had edited those and we had our designs as well, we would talk to the animators and use that as the jumping off point then for their drawings, to keep it very quiet and very contained and very dignified. So it was a kind of fascinating evolution watching these characters come to life.
Also with Kensuke, I mean, he may seem to be calm and controlled, but he's actually not really. I mean, he's had so many things happen to him, and also if you look at Michael arriving on the island, he reacts very badly to that. He actually has to learn. Michael helps him to learn control by the end of the film. I mean, he's actually a very conflicted person through all the things that have happened to him. So many of the things he's never been able to address that have happened to him in his past, and he never really went back to Japan to find out if his family had survived, for example. So that must always be playing on his mind. So when Michael first arrives on the island, Kensuke doesn't want him to be there, and he freezes him out, and he behaves quite terribly. But eventually he comes around to realizing that Michael's accidental arrival on the island could give him the opportunity to fulfill his parental duty that he never did. So it takes him a while to learn that, but they're both learning from each other, which is kind of the lovely thing about the relationship.
One of the most beautiful things in this film that I recommend to everybody, and in Spanish because it's gonna be in Spanish, is the birth of civilization. Civilization for me, and of course for many people, is when you take care of another. Your empathy allows you to take care of someone who is hurt, for instance. So in this film, Michael, the main character at the end, take care of this old man, and despite they don't speak the same language, they understand each other. So this is a strong message in this nowadays, and the movie works for me without cliches and without deja vu. For me, is something unique. One of the best film that we have seen here in Chile among robot dreams, for instance. What is your recommendation to young animators that want to make this kind of high quality movie? Because here in Chile we have very good animators, very good artists, but maybe this advice from you can make a change.
You could be easily lulled as a filmmaker into making the kind of film you think you ought to be making, because you either think it'll make you successful or rich or win you awards or whatever it is. And I think you just have to avoid that. You have to make the kind of films that you want to see. And if these artists and these filmmakers want to see a slower kind of film or a deeper kind of film, or a more complex kind of film or whatever it is, I think they're the people to do it. You can't wait for somebody to come to you and offer it to you. You just have to say, this is what I want to make, and you have to pursue that dream and make it happen yourself. What's that famous Gandhi phrase? Be the change you want to see in the world.
Of course,
That would
of
be my
course.
advice.
You can watch the reaction of the people, Q&A with the audience. How are your feelings about that?
We found that this film really does work if you sit in the audience. It's definitely an audience film because there are so many moments in it that you can hear complete silence. You know, like the Nagasaki sequence when the drip's coming down. There's not a single breath being held when it goes silent in that moment. And then later on the second half, there's a lot of tearful scenes. When you share it with an audience, it definitely is a communion kind of feeling that not all movies benefit necessarily from being with an audience. Sometimes you want to sit at home and be alone with the film, but this one definitely helps seeing it with an audience. There's a rather emotional ending. When the lights come up, a lot of people sort of tend to be hiding their eyes. Even Neil and I still tear up, and we've seen it 1,000 times. It catches you by surprise, and it's weird, but it does seem to work.
Yeah, and one of the wonderful things of the films is the animals. For me, it's a kind of Avatar, but set on Earth, set on an island with realistic environment and things you can touch and recognize. It's beautiful the way you portray the animals, the gorillas, the dog, all the stuff. How do you get that? How do you achieve to give life to these animals?
Well, there's two things really. On a technical level, we had an amazing animator called Ludovine Berthelot, French animator who has a real affinity for animals, and she was in control of the designing and overseeing the animation of all those creatures. The key thing we did with the animals is to give them all families. And one of the themes of the film is really about a need for family, whether it's blood family, adopted family, cross-species families. These animals were all going to be taken off the island at some point by the poachers again. So we decided that, we should really set these things up with families so you cared. They weren't just animals being taken away, they were families being broken apart. That just makes it far more powerful when that happens. When you're working out stories, you're trying to do setup and payoff all the time. When you've subtly set something up earlier on, it worked very, very well.
Thank you so much for your time. Congratulations. I deeply believe that this movie is going to work very well among the time. It's going to be a classic.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.